The Doomer, or Wojak, is a crappily drawn Microsoft Paint image originating from obscure image boards that eventually dominated the internet. And apparently, he was originally from Poland. So to the Polish, I gotta say, dziękuję. I could probably draw this guy better myself. How'd I do? The thing that always gets me is that this poorly drawn image from a Polish image board could represent so many human emotions that it eventually got well known enough to resonate with an entire generation of lonely folks to be like, hey, that's me, Amari. This bald MS Paint drawing has countless redraws and edits known as variants. Wojak, Sojak, the NPC, etc. We'll get more to that in a second, but there's something a bit deeper about this meme that has always caught my attention, because beyond its reputation as a meme, it speaks more profoundly to the zeitgeist, or the spirit of our time. Wojak was originally found on the Polish image board known as Vichan, somewhere between December of 2008 and December of 2009, thanks to a user who went under the name Wojak, also known as Wojak, hence the name that we all know today. Vichan is apparently dead and has no archives of its post, and the only surviving evidence of Wojak's appearance are a few posts by Wojak or Wojak himself. There's already a really good video about the history of Wojak, which I will link below, but today's video will be more about the implications of the meme in my own Tantris humble opinion. See what I did? The meme has since periodically dominated the internet at different times and for different purposes, usually in response to the absolute insanity of living in the 2020s, when everything feels like it's falling apart. But before a time when the meme became a complex representation of modernity, Wojak was originally known as that feels guy in English-speaking circles and became the go-to image for many guys suffering from chronic internet addiction. Because anyone could drag him into Microsoft Paint and add their own flair without the added difficulty of artistic proficiency to participate in the game. Wojak, therefore, encapsulated the feelings and melancholy of these millions of young men who led broke, isolated, lonely lives, like a visual hug. Thanks so much, bro. You're welcome, man.
Chapter 1. Overview of the Doomer.
Wojak memes vary from the Coomer, that guy you know who's playing with himself a little too much. The Boomer, often the clueless older person who has no idea how hard young people have it today compared to his heyday. And the Zoomer, who we actually don't really see quite as often as the meme's inception almost 7 years ago, because the Zoomer pretty much dominates youth culture now, and we don't really make fun of ourselves. We're too cool for that. I found a very good channel called Low Budget Stories, where Wojak plays the protagonist while the aforementioned characters are usually placeholders for the people around him. Boomers are usually the boss or the older figure. Zoomers are usually the younger, innocent friend. And there's even the Chad, who represents the handsome guy Wojak could never become. NPCs are the people with whom you will never find a connection due to their utter lack of character, while Sojak is usually the antagonist for his moralizing, pompous attitude. But all in all, you could place these vague representations of characters in most storytelling about modern life, because you and I have all seen the handsome Chad, the moralizing douche. We all know that out-of-touch old person who we want to throw out the window. We've all dealt with annoying Sojaks who believe to be morally and intellectually superior for having more Reddit experience than you. These representations often delineate people in less relatable ways than the original feels guy or Wojak himself, all with one notable exception. The Doomer. Hey, why you gotta take my spotlight, man? I thought I was a sad kid. I'm sorry, this is kind of cringe. Well, before we even get into it, the Doomer is Wojak's final form, a 20-something who wanders alone at night, grappling with the existential question of why he's here. The world seems bewildering, spiritually barren, and governed by those indifferent to humanity's quest for meaning. Modern man, as he exists, is spiritually adrift. Many Doomers look around their immediate environments, perhaps taking night walks, smoking cigarettes, and drinking heavily to cope with the stark reality that the world is run by self-serving psychopaths. The lack of a higher purpose in life leaves many seeking meaning through material wealth, as contemporary society dismisses any form of immaterial belief as mysticism at best and religious superstition at worst. Consequently, those who are poor, unattractive, and friendless are often forgotten, and no one seems to care. These people, in my opinion, are the true Doomers. The Doomer has been appropriated by many YouTube channels, pretty much showcasing the daily lives of modern people in many professions who are feeling spiritually empty in their routines as they stumble into every day like a severely depressed person. What with all the expectations to still get up in the morning, work mundane jobs, and shut the hell up. And that said, the desire to protect and be a strong figure like James Bond or Luke Skywalker or fucking Link often goes unnoticed and is sometimes mislabeled as toxic, much to the frustration of soon-to-be doomers. And if left to fester, you might start to see the doomer within yourself. Ah, damn it! On top of feelings left behind by society, the doomer represents the thought we have when we're skeptical of the belief that just because we have a new iPhone in our hands, by proxy we're better off than generations before. So when I see the familiar image of a man with a 5 o'clock shadow smoking a cigarette, I can't help but feel profound sadness. It's like The Scream by Edward Munch or The Sitting Gate by Van Gogh. The history of the art, while fascinating, is paired with the clear emotional reaction anyone will have to these two. Human emotion is universal. Human connection is universal, but we don't treat it that way anymore. No time is perfect, but I'm hard-pressed to believe that an image of a poorly drawn man sleeping alone in his bed with no one next to him would resonate with those celebrating the end of World War II and the birth of their new children. Honestly, this particular meme makes me sad. I even get a little teary-eyed if I look at it too often. Call me a softie if you will, but if I had the power to discern who truly needed it, I would sincerely offer free hugs to everybody. Occasionally, I feel completely consumed by this apathy. I can feel my own face hardening like a rock, trying to push down those emotions. You know, biting the bullet and repeating to myself, it is what it is. It is what it is. It is what it is.
Chapter 2. London Frog.
Despite the hardships in my own life over the past few years, there's always been someone whose story makes me think, well, I guess I have it decently after all. And the person in question was introduced to me by none other than Doomerism, one of my creative partners on this channel. He and I discussed the subject in detail a few nights ago. Sadly, he's not here today because he's busy with other commitments in his life, unlike me, cloistered in my apartment writing video essays. I'll do my best to explain this on his behalf. You see, he told me about a peculiar blogger who used to frequent his home board, the literature board, on 4chan. Back in 2017, despite its fair share of negativity, people discussed books and made friends there pretty easily, and it wasn't the parody of itself that it's become today. Though I've never been a 4chan user myself, on that thread, a blogger named London Frog showed up in 2018 and began posting about his monotonous life in London. He would almost comedically and consistently talk about binge eating to cope after seeing beautiful women in his area, in a proto-incel fashion. These posts continued for years, despite 4chan's general disdain for blog posting. Doomerism found London Frog's quixotic nature fascinating enough to compile his posts into an ebook, which you can read online, and which I will link in the description. Here's a compiler's note. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But for this one overfed frog, London's perpetual rain always manages to find him. Habitual strolls through the streets of London are what keep this melancholic amphibian grounded as he searches for an escape from the chains of ennui that characterize his daily life. A self-proclaimed black-pilled, ugly, beta, no-friends loser autist who has, quote-unquote, wasted his youth, attempts to salvage a semblance of meaning amidst an all-consuming existential dread, with a protagonist that is simultaneously pitiable, loathsome, and at times oddly relatable. Many readers consider his writings to be the definitive literary work to capture the underwhelming existence of life in a digitalized age. With the compiler's note out of the way, here's an excerpt before we move forward today.
What am I thinking? Friday, August 31st, 8:39 a.m. I was sitting in my boring job today and realized how stark the difference between consumer cuck and producer bull is. Look at the whole of the European Union, apart from the UK. Many smart people, yet absolutely nothing is invented because the consumer cuck culture destroys the initiative of people. I whine about the lack of money, but I must have easily spent over £1,000, a conservative estimate, in the past year on junk food and coffee. I whine about a lack of free time today, but have wasted the past 5 hours. Literature is utterly dead. It is so boring seeing low IQ American suburb-raised, low-tier state school continental philosophy lovers on this board. You are the lower-tier midwits. Pynchon is midwit boring crap. So are DeLillo, not all of his books, and DFW, and Gaddis. How do I make myself productive in my huge amounts of free time? Under my own initiative, when I have zero motivation and a cynical outlook on life due to the fact that I am a 27-year-old, ugly, beta male with no friends or social life, no female attention, ever, and never been to a pub, club, or party. For the past 6 years, I've wasted all of my free time on mindless internet browsing. I've gone to the gym regularly, and have also been very strong at some points, but being healthy has never automatically made me feel like I have a great or meaningful life. Thank God I'm not that dumb. I finished university with an acceptable grade and periods of zero effort after a long life of doing well in education, though I hated the subject, so I perversely see this particular lack of effort as something to be proud of. I also managed to get, and I'm currently in a job that looks good on my CV, and it requires almost no work or time at the office. I will start an even better job later this year, though I wouldn't class myself as a high flyer for my age. Definitely not in terms of pay, though to an uneducated observer, I would seem to have potential. So I'm not a complete loser, just unable to motivate myself to work hard in my free time, with uncertain goals, chances of success, and no externally imposed deadlines. The only other hobbies I have are daily binge on either junk food, fast food, or both to stop feeling sad about life, aimless walking or driving around, while hoping that my 20s spontaneously stop feeling wasted, large amounts of coffee drinking to give myself aimless urgency, and reading. I've had gigantic amounts of free time in the past 4 years. I've wasted almost all of it. I've done some productive things in my free time. But I think, if I was completely driven, I could call it 2 months worth of work. I endlessly agonize over how productivity systems or rules could help me, but I see all structure as a self-limiting sign of failure. We all have the image of the nerdy guy in the brain-dead office job with his scheduled lunch, or a low IQ person who takes motivational self-help slogans seriously. I am sure that constant self-questioning is the price you have to pay if you live in the nihilistic void, and I will surely feel like a failure if I ever leave it. Whether because I choose personal rules or a productivity system, or if I get a job that requires me to have a regular schedule.
Yeah, geez, man, tell me how you really feel. I have to say, it's pretty depressing to hear this guy ramble on and on about his life, but in a way, hearing some, not all, but some of his thoughts remind me of things I've thought about in my own daily life, where I'm wandering around town, haunting the neighborhoods because I just don't know what the hell to do with myself. Doomers suffer from this perpetual malaise with no cure in sight. The image of a guy sitting in front of his computer, unsure of what else to do but numb the pain with mild distractions from the black void of the ennui, is perfectly captured in these posts, often with a comical touch if I do say so myself. But I really have to thank McLuhanism for compiling these notes. Shameless plug, but please consider subscribing to his channel. He's a fantastic researcher and writer. Again, you can also read the first 2 volumes of London Frog below if you create an account on the website. So, anyway, I wanted to also talk about... Who the hell is...
The doomer archetype is one that has come and gone in looser forms throughout time, and his existence is only possible because of a long series of trends going back a few hundred years, relating mostly to work, time, and family. Historically, people have found themselves working, always. The idea of leisure as the time to sit around and do nothing is almost nonsensical to folks of the past, as before modernity, which is the time between roughly 1600 and the present, if you weren't working, you'd still be active with family, friends, clubs, church, and several other things. Whether you were playing some kind of game or doing some other activity, or preparing for some sort of festival or even doing housework, humans have very rarely found the time to actually just lounge around without a particular purpose. In the present day, we often find ourselves burnt out and exhausted from work and all the time constraints it leaves us with, where you have little time to actually get anything done save for your weekends or vacation days. I know from personal experience, having been working for 50 hours a week and during the night, what it's like to have completely zero time for anything but feeding myself, even when I need to get more done. It's all too common you hear someone's tales of workplace misery and meaninglessness. With all this investment and such insignificant return, it's difficult to find reasons to get up in the morning when it all seems to be for nothing in particular. Truth is, things weren't always the way they are now. In the past, they didn't work as long as modern people, and even on occasions they did, they worked in bursts. In fact, farmers, being the bulk of people until fairly recently, usually spent around 6 hours actively working per day and could be expected to work less than 230 days per year. All the while, they'd be working very closely with their family and to their direct benefit. It wasn't until around the mid-1600s that anything like a 40-hour work week even existed. Folks didn't actually keep time in the same way that we do, or with nearly as much diligence until around the 1650s either. 1656 or so, if I remember correctly. And with the rise of industrialization and Enlightenment ideas rooted in overvaluing efficiency and progress, time obsession increased as a means of control by forcing workers to abide closely by hard time constraints, whereas before there was a comparatively lax attitude towards most kinds of labor. In regards to time that allowed for higher flexibility in the personal lives of workers, that is. What this would look like normally is high-paced work seasons contrasted with slow seasons, which gave plenty of time for a fuller life and community activities. Back then, you wouldn't need money for absolutely everything. Everyone in your locality would be deeply integrated and invested in one another. Working for money as a means of survival wouldn't be as essential, so dedicating almost all of your time to it would be sort of pointless. In most places and times, in most pre-modern economies, people would mostly barter or do favors for one another as a means of generating wealth and supporting each other. With fluctuation, this was the steady state of things across the world until early modernity, where more so than ever, things changed increasingly and rapidly in favor of a certain way of living. Flash forward to the present, where centralization around cities has grown to the highest point it's ever been. Deracination from embedded communities and families means you are made to think you have to rely on yourself alone. And the efforts from states and capitalists in the last few hundred years means you need to mechanically graft yourself to a hard time system using technology. Brings us to a world where your time is someone or something else's, and frankly, sad ideas like free time, where you do something useless to feel better about doing something useless, is the new normal. You start to see a clearer picture of a better world long lost. From the crushing oppression of mechanized society in the context of history, we can easily see the growth of a character archetype like the Doomer coming into the forefront of an entire generation's mentality. Once, people could rely on a corporate and definitely not nuclear family structure, strong, now so-called gig economies, and many other institutions that have become extinct or waning. We're atomized for the sake of things too far out of reach to fully comprehend. Knowing that at some point the world wasn't quite as bad as it's been, and that there's no clean and clear way back to said point, becomes the exact kind of soul-destroying experience that spawns doomers. But here's the deal. Despite the doom and gloom of 400 years of decline and maybe more, having a bigger picture should tell you that it's a lot more complicated than believing that the world's going to end. In fairness, there's a lot of ways in which it will justify the hopeless mindset of doomer types. Think of any issue. Consider how many compounding problems across all boards there are, and feel the dread and despair of living in an unsalvageable world. Now be surrounded by mountains and oceans of messaging from all sides, coming from a series of more or less loosely interlocked propaganda machines, telling you there's not only no way out, not only was there probably never a way out, but also that there's nothing which can be saved from the present situation. There's your doomer. And this way of thinking comes from people soaked in a decaying world of modern thought, scorned by the reality of natural decline and death. There's been over 100 years of recognizing this problem, and many thinkers have struggled for solutions from all kinds of perspectives. And most recently, observations from a sect of left-wing thinkers from the latter half of the last century have illuminated a possible way out. Though, I think that's for another time.
Chapter 3 Memes of Meaning.
The internet and memes represent both a new and old concept. Publicly displayed posters and paintings were perhaps early latent forms of memes, prints of which people would sometimes buy to remind themselves of the meaningful messages conveyed by them. Did you know in olden times people would have a skull at their desk to remind them of fucking death? Yeah, that shit ain't fun. You're going to die! The distinction between a meme and an artistic image lies not in things telling you you're going to die or the encapsulation of a truth that humorously shocks the viewer. No. But instead, it's mass reproduction. An article in the New York Times quoted Kirby Conrad, a professor of linguistics at Swarthmore College, who, and I quote, said, "I would explain the concept of a meme, a self-replicating chunk of information, by asking someone about an inside joke they had with friends or an advertising jingle that's been stuck in their head for 20 years. That chunk of information, the joke or the jingle, self-replicates because we humans like to share and repeat stuff. When we repeat the joke or sing the jingle, that's an instance of the meme reproducing itself." The word meme first appeared in the New York Times crossword in 1953 with the clue same, French. And speaking of which, in French, the word meme, or meme, as we stupid, arrogant English speakers say, means same, which perhaps aligns with the nature of memes being reproduced and generated across the internet. Wojak and the Doomer are large-scale reproduced images meant to convey a composite person, an idea or collection of experiences represented by a given character. Wojak and the Doomer have become such a phenomenon because unlike other memes, he's evolved into a miniature universe that most people can see themselves in. This may be a stretch, but it reminds me how archetypes are used in Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, where characters embody roles we intuitively understand. The same way Han Solo from Star Wars or Snape from Harry Potter embody a devious character whose intentions aren't very well known, or how Obi-Wan and Gandalf are the older teacher-like characters who lead the protagonist. There are memes that represent people, or at least personality traits which we've all encountered before in our daily lives. And I think this is a part of the artistic genius of these memes because they represent our world much in the same way popular art did 100 years ago. If the art historians get our time right, Wojak memes will definitely have a page in the archives.
Four.
The lack of agency in time seconds. Doomer is often faced with the reality that the world must have been better back then, as he lives in a time of simulacra and perversion. Many mainstream creative shows are rehashes of old franchises, but they aren't even good. They're just perversions of what they used to be. If I had to say, a lot of this is due to the fact that our society isn't run by creative people anymore. There, I fucking said it. We live in a society. But rather managerial and bureaucratic narcissists who care more about their own voice than anything said franchise had to say. I'm looking at you, Ryan Johnson. Bureaucracy thrives on procedure and often embodies a corporate mentality that stifles creativity. Authority figures typically prefer to assert control, while creative independent thinkers are more likely to challenge institutions, miss deadlines, and try looking for unorthodox solutions to mundane problems. And because of this, creative individuals often get squeezed out, unable to conform as rigidly as managers who stick around. The managerial class rarely has to own up to its own mistakes and often fails to understand why things aren't working out or why your project is a dumpster fire. Whoever is running Star Wars right now needs to grasp that George Lucas created a beautiful world for people to escape into. And today's handlers, however, seem to be blind to the fact that trying to recreate the magic without understanding what made it special is killing the franchise. And again, I know we're a little off topic, but this relates to the Doomer in that you see beautiful things collapsing around you. They're collapsing in on themselves, and you're like, well, can't do anything about that. It could be some other kind of art, show, political problem, whatever. Something where you're lacking agency and you see the thing just getting destroyed and you're like, well, the world's getting worse. Or at least it seems like it's getting worse. Do you see where I'm going? Am I dumb? Okay, whatever. I guess I'm dumb.
Chapter 5. Hunger for Authenticity.
So it's hard to know when things feel real anymore. The problem with social media that bothers me most is that it shows a snippet of someone else's life, usually embellished to the point of looking too good to be true, yet we don't have enough information to really know whether or not it's an accurate representation of that person's life. So whether it's rich or beautiful people, eventually it all starts to feel fake. Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist, identifies three main forces that bind successful societies: strong institutions, shared stories, and social capital. Haidt argues that the current media landscape has weakened all three, eroding social cohesion and rewarding divisive and inflammatory content. I can't think of any shared stories that truly bind our country together anymore. Our social institutions don't serve the interest of half the people, depending on the state and or what side of the debate you're on. Even if there were good social institutions, perhaps the use of social media itself would tear through any stable social fabric anyway. Sometimes I wonder if social media is just intrinsically harmful, amplifying the worst facets of humanity, such as our desire for destruction when we get bored. Maybe humanity is doomed to suffer by virtue of being itself. I mean, no matter how amazing things are, no matter how connected we are to other people, things feel cruddy. And speaking of which, let's delve into literature for a second, shall we? So, Fyodor Dostoevsky, a Russian novelist who you have also probably already heard of, touched on the idea that boredom can lead people to create problems in his novel Notes from Underground. Here's a relevant quote from the book as it pertains to humanity's inability to feel satisfied. Shower upon him every earthly blessing. Drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species. And even then, out of sheer ingratitude and sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick. He would even risk losing everything, deliberately desiring the most harmful nonsense, the most impractical absurdity, just to inject his fatal, fantastical element into an otherwise positive and sensible situation. It is just his fantastic dreams, his vulgar folly that he will desire to retain, simply in order to prove to himself as though that were so necessary, that men are still men and not the keys of a piano. In the end, the underground man remains trapped in his own nihilism, unable to escape the existential angst that pervades his existence. And some of the complex emotions described by Doomers can be found in this book, albeit having been written over 130, 40 years ago. Just to reiterate, the Doomer in some ways is a badge of honor, as it's an admission that the person refuses to be easily swayed by popular narratives, or at least, hopefully. Some may find a very lukewarm comfort in knowing that, at the very least, they feel authentic to themselves, when the rest of the world doesn't reflect any sort of authenticity anywhere else. The pursuit of comfort and happiness is not enough to fulfill the deeper, more complex needs of the human soul, and he argues that people find meaning in their struggles and suffering, and our current materialistic worldview seems to be a reason that the Doomer feels alienated, as deeper mystical aspects of life may reflect his desires more than others, despite being completely ignored in the spiritual desert that the West has become. The Doomer represents the effect of the spiritual hole in our hearts left by the emptiness of modernity, and thus is a symptom that things are horribly wrong. Anyway, thanks for watching. Scrutly Mutley.